say that if you really want to have a true and complete history, then you have to start at the beginning with the creation story. And but of course, I always say, well, you know, we would be here forever if we did that. So just kind of skip over a lot of that. But this is one of the famous painting done by Ernie Smith, an artist from the Tonawanda Reservation. It's in the collection of the Rochester Museum and Science Center, showing, you know, the creation story of Sky Woman falling from the world up above onto the turtle's back. And you know, this was done as part of the WPA Indian Arts Project back in between 1935 and 1941. And of course, you all know what this is. You're all familiar with the Hiawatha Wampum Belt. And so when I talk about the history, I talk about the formation of the Confederacy. And one of the things I always stress is that you know, there's a lot of discussion about when the Confederacy was actually formed. But you know, I always say that I'm a bad historian because when is less important than why it was formed. And so you know, once again, another Ernie Smith painting from the Rochester Museum showing Hiawatha and the Peacemaker combing the snakes from Tadadaho's hair as they present the great law to him. And over there, or on this side, we have a map showing where our territory, what sort of territory we covered, we occupied and controlled back around 1500, and then you might be able to see all these little red dots here are our current territories. So I skip ahead a few hundred years to a really important moment in our history, and that's the Clinton-Sullivan campaign. And during the American Revolution, when George Washington's soldiers through what is now central and western New York, through the Genesee Valley, to basically chase our people out of out of our villages, out of our homes, and to on a scorched earth policy to prevent us from siding with the British during the Revolutionary War. And this is really a big moment in the history of the Tonawanda people, Tonawanda Seneca people in particular, because what happened is that everybody moved out and went up to Fort Niagara. They took refuge up at Fort Niagara. And it's a little hard to see on the map here, but over here is Geneseo, along the south of Rochester, along the Genesee River, and that was, you know, at that time a central place for our people. And then you have Fort Niagara up here, just up in the far northwest corner of western New York. And so if you draw a diagonal between Geneseo and Fort Niagara, Tonawanda sits about halfway between the two. So after everybody fled to Fort Niagara and spent a really terrible winter there, after they started to move out, that's when Tonawanda became a major population center, because a lot of the people moved out and came and settled at Tonawanda. And here's a later map, Seneca Reservations, 1797 to 1826. So a lot of our territory was lost in the Treaty of Big Tree in 1797, and so you see that what was left, several small reservations along the Genesee River, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Oil Springs, Buffalo Creek, and Tonawanda. And Tonawanda was much larger at that time. When at the time of the Treaty of Buffalo Creek, it was about 20,000 acres. And over time, it shrank. Let's see. Okay, and here another painting by Ernie Smith showing Handsome Lake preaching the Longhouse about 1810. And so, Handsome Lake was born. Go back. You can see he was born over here in this area, along this reservation. He moved. He traveled down. Was at Allegheny for a while, and then eventually moved up to Tonawanda. And so, so what you see here, this is, these are the reservations up to about the 1820s, and then during that time there were several treaties, illegal treaties that were never ratified, where a lot of the reservations along the Genesee River were lost, and land also was lost in the other reservations, including Tonawanda. In the 1820s, Tonawanda was reduced from about 20,000 acres to 12,800 acres, and that it eventually became reduced even further. In 1838, the Treaty of Buffalo Creek was signed, and in that treaty, the Tonawanda Reservation, well, at that time, all of the Seneca reservations were sold off, and everybody was supposed to be shipped out west up to Kansas Territory. Well, as you all know, that's a fraudulently signed treaty. It was never enforced, and so a second treaty was negotiated 5 years later. In 1848, the second Buffalo Creek Treaty was signed, and that treaty, what happened was the Quakers who were helping our people and trying to keep our homeland, and who helped negotiate that treaty. I'm going to blame the Quakers. So since I'm here in Cattaraugus and not at Tonawanda, I'll blame them rather than blame any of you. But what happened was in that treaty, Cattaraugus and Allegheny were saved, but Buffalo Creek and Tonawanda were not. They were still sold off. So, but the leaders at Tonawanda refused to abide by this treaty because they had not participated in the negotiations, and they said that none of our people had signed them. And if you look at the treaty, if you look at the signatures and the names in the treaty, you will see that that's true. That you look at the names of who signed the treaty and who the people are, the leaders were at Tonawanda at that time, and you'll not see any of the Tonawanda Seneca's leaders' names on that treaty. So what they did was they said they were going to continue to fight and stay in their homes and keep their homeland. And so what they do is, at that time, they separated themselves from the rest of the Seneca Nation, and they became the Tonawanda Band of Senecas. And it was also during the same time period that the people here instituted a different tribal government, an elected government with a written constitution. And Tonawanda at that time kept all of the traditional sachems and clan mother positions. And so that's continued to this day. And it wasn't until a Supreme Court case finally forced essentially the United States to negotiate a third treaty at Tonawanda, the Treaty of 1857. And basically what the people there did was they were still supposed to go out to Kansas. So what they did was they sold off their rights to the lands out west, out in Kansas Territory. And they used that money to basically buy the reservation back, to buy back their own homes. And so Tonawanda is unusual in that they have an actual deed to their territory, to their reservation. Unfortunately, they weren't able to buy all of it back, and so by this time, Tonawanda was reduced to its present size of 7,549 acres, or approximately 11 square miles. And here is a picture of the Longhouse at Tonawanda today. as I mentioned before, Handsome Lake came to Tonawanda, and many of his relatives and descendants continued to live at Tonawanda, and they continued to carry on his message. So Tonawanda has always been sort of a stronghold for the Longhouse religion. This is a picture of a log cabin. So as I mentioned before, people, Seneca people moved out of Fort Niagara and came and settled at Tonawanda. And now the story is the oral history that we have is that soldiers from Fort Niagara came out and helped to build log cabins for our people at Tonawanda. And there are still about 8 or 9 log cabins still in existence at Tonawanda. People still live in them, people still use them, and so they've been handed down, from family member to family member. And we're working. One of the things that our historical society is doing is to trying to see if we can find out the dates of these log cabins, and I'll talk a little bit about that more a little later. As I mentioned, we continue to have a tribal government composed of chiefs chosen according to clan by the clan mothers. Here we have the Council of Chiefs. This is pictures from 1909. Right here is one of my ancestors, the Reverend John Griffin. Their clan. He was a Baptist minister and an Indian doctor. So, and over here is another one of my relatives, Thomas Poudry. Thomas Poudry was the Wolf Clan sachem, and he was chosen to succeed Ely Parker after Ely Parker died, and the sachemship became open.
Is Poudry Road named after him, or is it because of family?
Yes. Yes. This is a map. This is a map from about 1890, and it shows the current boundaries, the 7,449 acres, and it shows the list of all the different houses on there at the time. And this map, you may have seen this map. It was one of several in the 1892 census that was done by New York State. There was a book, Cornell University Press published a book showing that, so you may have seen that. And this is a terrific resource because, you can, not all, but many of the houses there are still there today. And you can, even for those that aren't, you can kind of tell if you know the family. You can see how people end up where they are today based on the map, based on, you can see that their great-grandparents lived there, and so that, it says, oh, well, that explains why, their descendants live there today. Talking about the Poudrys, over here on this road, all this property along that road there was part of the Edward Poudry farm, and so that's where, as a descendant, I live along that road, and many of my neighbors are my relatives. Okay. In addition to the Longhouse, we also have we have two churches on the reservation. The Baptist church at the top and the Presbyterian church at the bottom. Unfortunately, the Presbyterian church has closed. The congregation dwindled to about 4 people, and they're no longer in a position to be able to keep it up. There are, however, a few of us, many of us from the Historical Society, who are trying to, hopefully try to maintain the building a little bit. The cemetery there is still active. We still have people, family members and people buried there continue to want to be buried in the cemetery. Here's some images of some of our veterans. People from Tonawanda have participated in America's wars as far back as the War of 1812. One of my ancestors, Louis Poudry, is buried in the Baptist Church Cemetery at Tonawanda, and he's the only War of 1812 veteran that has a marker where we know they're buried there. We know that there are others buried out there, but we don't have a marker for them. We don't know precisely where they are. Over here on the left are two Civil War veterans, William Mason and John Bigfire. At the top, we have World War I veterans. As you may be aware, the United States tried to draft our people during World War I, but they didn't have to go because we weren't U.S. citizens. And in fact, I suspect that was one of the reasons behind the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, that they figured, well, if we make them citizens, then we can draft them. So at the bottom are several World War II veterans. This picture is from 1947. They're getting ready to march in a parade. Tonawanda, again, the population has remained fairly steady over time in the neighborhood of like between about 600 people, between 500 to 700 people residing on the reservation. Out of about 650 people, 130 people, including 9 women, served during World War II. So think about that, 130 out of roughly 650. Well, that's a significant portion of the population. We still have one World War II veteran living today. So, and on the right, 90, I think he's 97. So, and over on the right, we have some veterans from the Vietnam War. So, even though people continue to fight and serve in the military through Korea, Vietnam, and we even have people serving today. This is a picture of the community house, the Tonawanda. The community house technically is not located on the reservation, but located adjacent to it. The Tonawanda Indian Community Association formed back in the 30s, and again, this was built as part of the WPA project, except for the supervisor at the top. It was all native labor from the reservation, and it was opened in 1939. An addition was built in the 70s, and they continue to add on and do more renovations even today. So, and what happened is the community association owns the property, but they lease operations for the community house to New York State. So that's sort of a mixed blessing there.
Do they pay taxes on that land? In the building?
No, because they're a nonprofit organization. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Historical Society. The Tonawanda Reservation Historical Society was founded in 1998. Paul Winnie was the person who got it started. Just sort of brought people together, and we just sort of started probably much the way this group started, just sort of to get people get together to talk and exchange information. What we started to do, we started to collect photographs, just family photos from different people, and we amassed enough within about a year or so that we said, what are we going to do with all this? So, well, we said, let's have an exhibit. So we had an exhibit. We basically took, I think, refrigerator boxes and just sort of folded them over into like a tent shape, and stuck, pictures on them. And it proved to be successful enough that we said, well, let's do it again. And we collected more pictures, and so that's continued. We also started collecting artifacts, and we have brought those artifacts out not only at our own exhibit, but in other places as well. We've loaned them to other historical societies. These images are from an exhibit on baseball at the Iroquois Museum out in Schoharie. Here we have an old baseball uniform from the 1930s that belonged to one of our members. And over here we have a photograph also from the 1930s of some of our men playing baseball. Here's some pictures from one of our earlier exhibits. You can see, we have display boards that have photos. We'll have different, themes for some of them. We'll have people, sort of in old-fashioned outfits, or houses, or that sort of thing. Over here, we have some painting, some artwork done by some of the people from our community. We're always trying to get community members to come in and bring out some things they have. In our most recent exhibit, we had people bring out their corn husk dolls. Here's another example. Here's an old women's basketball uniform from, I think, the 1950s. Over here you can just sort of see we have photos of old lacrosse teams. My aunt, Helen Abrams, everybody talks about how she always had a camera, and I'm sure you know people like that here, or maybe some of you are those people that you have a camera and you're constantly taking pictures of everything. I joke that my Aunt Helen must have attended every wedding on the reservation from 1945 to 1980, because we have all wedding pictures, so many wedding pictures of people. And we went, after she died, my uncle loaned us, she had about 30 notebooks. And we went through and we scanned as many of them as we could. And we ended up with about 800 photos. And I estimated there are probably close to 2,500 photos total, that she had. And so we managed to preserve many of them. And I'm sad to say that the original photos and photo albums were lost in the fire. So we were extremely fortunate that we managed to preserve at least some of them for our people and for our descendants. And over here on the right, we have another picture showing some of the people at our annual exhibit. It's usually in October. This year, we moved it to the first weekend in November. And we may, October is a pretty busy month for many of us, so we may keep it in November. But once again, we have, in this particular image, one of our members set up little questionnaires. We asked, what something is, and had the Seneca name for it, and people sort of had to guess or figure out what it was, and then you flip open the thing to get the answer. So making our exhibit a little interactive, in a low-tech way. Also, you can see in the background some exhibit cases. One of the things that we do, we also borrow artifacts from the Rochester Museum's Indian Arts Project, because so many of our people participated in that, and or today, are their descendants. We like to see some of the work that was done by our parents or grandparents or great grandparents, and so they bring a lot of those out. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to find out more about the history of the log cabins on our reservation. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been working with Cornell University's tree ring lab to do dendrochronology, which basically means trying to date something based on the rings of the tree. And so they take samples from some of the logs, the log cabin, and here that's what you see them doing. Researchers from Cornell University working with the staff from the Rochester Museum, trying to see if we can find out how old this log cabin is. There are 4 log cabins from Tonawanda in museum collections. There's one at the Rochester Museum, there's one at the State Museum, there's one at Cooperstown, Fenimore Art Museum, and there's one owned by the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian.
Those ones that are at the museums, are they on loan? Or do the museums, or were they gifts to the museum?
They were gifts. They were sold to the museum. And in fact, they were all sold by the same person.
Oh yeah, that's right, okay, now I remember.
Nick Bailey was the one, and he claimed that they were all his boyhood home. So he must have moved around a lot as a child. So we're always trying to think of different activities to do, to participate in, and to sort of make people aware of our history and what we're doing. So in 2015, sort of at the end of all the Civil War celebrations that were going on during that time, we had a wreath-laying ceremony at the grave of Ely Parker at Forest Lawn in Buffalo. And so our people participated. We had Civil War reenactors come as an honor guard. Ely Parker was a Mason, so some of the Masons from the nearby town of Akron came out and participated. We had hymn singers from our community, and we had a wreath laying, and one of the people that participated in the wreath laying was a Parker descendant, Al Parker, who has been a reenactor, and was when they did a reenactment at Appomattox Courthouse for the signing of the surrender. He was there participating as Ely Parker. So he came and helped place the wreath for our activity here. And so to move on to the genealogy portion, talking about Ely Parker, here we have images of his parents, Elizabeth Johnson Parker, William Parker. And there's a lot of discussion about where they came from and who their people are. And I brought some genealogy charts that I've been working on that we can look at afterwards. And here, of course, are I have to confess, I had to do some work on this at the last minute, and I didn't quite finish. So that's why you have under Nicholson and Isaac Newton. I don't have their birth and death dates on there quite yet. But we have William and Elizabeth's children, some of their children, Ely, his sister Caroline, his brother Nicholson, and his brother Isaac Newton. They have another brother, Levi, and another one, Spencer, who didn't use the last name of Parker initially. But lot of people will talk about being an Ely Parker descendant, and Ely Parker married a non-Indian woman and had one daughter. So technically there aren't any direct native descendants of Ely Parker. Most of the Parker people who are Parker descendants today are descended from his brother Levi or his brother Nicholson. Caroline didn't have any children of her own either. So this is a picture of probably one of the most well-known people from Tonawanda Reservation history, Nancy Black Squirrel. And there are numerous newspaper clippings, newspaper accounts. She died in 1928, and a lot of them will tell you that she lived to be 108, which is not true based on the information that we've uncovered. She only lived to be 94. Which, if you stop to think about that, is actually quite still a remarkable achievement in 1928. Here's another photograph that's in the Historical Society collection. This is, once again, my relative. When I do these presentations, so I'm the one who's putting them together, so I can put whoever I want. So I put my relatives. So this is a photo. This came from this. Several people have this photograph because these are the Poudry family. This is a Poudry family, and so it's a large family. Edward and Amanda Poudry had 11 children, and so there are a lot of their descendants all over the place, more than I can keep track of. But this particular image came from my grandmother's collection. And so this woman seated here, this is Amanda Griffin Poudry, and I think 10. I used to say 9, but I think now that 10 of her 11 children are in this photograph. And this photograph is from about 1900, and I know this because, well, based on what I could figure out. This is my great-grandfather, Barnum Poudry here, and I'm assuming that this baby that he's holding was my grandmother, and I know that she was born in 1899, so based on how old she probably is in this picture, I'm guessing that this picture is probably from about 1900, and I have been able to figure out, I think everybody's name, all the not only Amanda's children, but their children as well in this picture. I still haven't figured out the dog's name yet. Here's another picture of the Poudrys. Based on the fact that they're all wearing the same clothes, I'm guessing that this picture was probably taken at the same time. And that other picture was probably taken around the side of the house, and this is taken at the front. And that house is still standing. And people still live there today. Here's another picture, once again, the woman in the center there, that's Amanda, and 4 of her daughters are in this picture with some of their children. The one on the far left there is her eldest daughter, Melvina. Amanda's children were born over a 25-year period. The youngest. Her youngest daughter was born in 1883, and so her eldest was born, in the 1850s. Here are Melvina's children, Simon and Libby Skye. Melvina married Warren Skye, and then after he died, she married Stephen Skye. But these are her two children. It says, okay, it says Snipe clan, but they're actually Wolf clan. That's an error there on my part. But Simon and Libby, her children, and their descendants are still around today. So now I'm going to switch to the other side. My father's side, the Kudris are my mother's side of the family, my maternal family members, and so I switched to the other side, which is the Abrams side, my father's side, who are Tonawanda Seneca. So these are my grandparents, Albert and Marusha Skye Abrams. Marusha, my grandmother, was my grandfather's third wife. When they got married in 1914, he was 45 and she was 21. Well, you know, it is a big age difference, but you know, they had 10 children, six of whom lived to adulthood, and the youngest was born. My aunt Shirley was born in 1935 when my grandfather was 65. He lived to be 91. He died before I was born, but he lived to be 91. He was born in 1869 and died in 1960. So I'm hoping I'll live as long as he does. And I'm not married, so there's still hope. On the right-hand side is a report card from Tunasasa School there, Quaker Bridge, that my grandmother attended in 1904. And so it's, I posted this document for those of you who are on Facebook. You know, there's a page for the school, and you can see you can see the report card there, and it's quite interesting. The interesting part here, because you know they have reading and arithmetic and you know all these other things, and down at the bottom here it says Seneca, and it says taught some. So they kept track. You know, if you were if you didn't speak English, they knew it. Here, over there on the far right is my father, Alter, and four of his brothers. They all served during World War II, as I mentioned. You know, all the people that served during World War II. My Uncle Woody, my Uncle Myron, Shack, as they call him, my Uncle Homer, and my Uncle Frank. Myron is the only one still living. He's the one that's 97. He has three sons, Bruce and Brian and Steve. Bruce works for Seneca Nation in the planning department, I believe. And here's some images. I don't know how well you can see them, if you recognize anybody from here. As I mentioned, my grandfather's married 3 times. His second wife was Virginia Steeprock, and she was from Cattaraugus. And so there are a lot of family members here. And although this is from a later reunion, I came out here one year. I think it was here in this building. We had a family reunion. I want to say in 2006 or 2007. I had like one bowl of corn soup, and then I spent the next hour and a half writing down people's names, all my relatives from Cattaraugus. And they kept Well, I think they kept on having children as I was speaking because, I kept on writing more names. And I can show you some of the charts. So, and I'll talk about one of the genealogy resources that we have is the what some people refer to as the clan book, or the Tooker book. Elizabeth Tooker, who is an anthropologist at Temple University and who is doing research, did some genealogy. She went out and she talked to people from our community and compiled a genealogy. There are some errors in it, and it doesn't have any dates. You just sort of, a lot of these are basically almost raw notes based on what she did. And the nice thing about it is that it's organized primarily by clan. So it has a section for Wolf Clan and Turtle Clan and Bear Clan and so on. So it's easy to follow, and that's one of the things that's always been useful. And Jack knows this, right? That having the clan, knowing what the clan is of a person, can really be a help in creating a genealogy. Because as you know, a lot of times there are people that have different people that have the same name. I can't tell you how many Caroline Parkers or Laura Parkers there are at Tonawanda over the years, all at the same time. And so if you know that one is Beaver Clan and the other one is Hawk Clan, then you know that they're not the same person. So that's about it. As I said, I have I pull out some charts that I've worked on. Jack Erickson has been a big help. I've been working, as I said, the Tooker genealogy doesn't have dates and has some errors, so I've been, over time trying to sort of redo them so that we have the dates for people and correct some of the errors, and using some of the resources that were at Fredonia. A lot of the resources, Audrey Potter, who was married to one of my cousins, she's really done the bulk of the work. She has a huge, file boxes, an entire room of files, compiling all sorts of information from numerous sources. We've used annuity censuses, we've used death listings, obituaries, all kinds of resources. Those of you that went to the New York State Archives probably saw some of the New York State censuses that were done over the years. That's another resource. And just based on our own knowledge and information about our families, and sometimes you have to go out and talk to people and find out, and get information that doesn't necessarily show up in the official records. I've had people tell me, and I'm sure you've heard this or experienced this yourself, like, well, so-and-so isn't really, somebody's father, somebody else is, and, they'll tell us that's some of that information that's kind of hidden that, you wouldn't necessarily find out otherwise. Of course, you have to take that with a grain of salt sometimes, because you don't know, whether what they're telling you is true or not. So that's it. As I said, I have, I can bring out some of my family charts that I've done. I have some for the Ely Parker relatives and some for my own. And I could show you, all my Cattaraugus relatives are. So don't hold that against me.